My concept is titled Security Blanket Syndrome, and I define it as the failure of individuals in the whole to acknowledge harmful authoritarian behavior, power, and structures. The failure of acknowledgement stems from a deep rooted fear of punishment, physical, emotional, social, etc., for objecting to the majority ruling. Over time, a security blanket is stitched from the threads of desensitization and self preservation. My reason for crafting this concept stems from modern day discourse. Areas such as politics, human welfare, societal norms, and the rise of social media all contribute to the rising security blanket syndrome phenomenon. As the United States further divides itself, so do the relationships between its citizens and Western perceptions of international operations. This naivety or ignorance, depending on how you view it, has bled into state and federal legislation and international standing with other nations. Now more than ever, we must recognize our activism and have our nation for what it is, a comfortable disconnect. It has become far easier to consider a hashtag a form of effective support and change. Our psyches can now take in more information than ever with technology, yet our emotional pull to these catastrophes has dwindled. We have replaced horror with expectation, and fellow man's grave has become more recognizable in flashing news headlines. The DNA of security blanket syndrome can be traced back to colonialism and herd mentality. The colonizer convinces his fellow Europeans that the oppression of minority groups is necessary for a well-rounded society. Individuals may hold some skepticism for this notion, but this mistrust will be weaponized if verbalized by the concerned. Thus, a herd mentality is born. Operating in more significant numbers eradicates the vulnerability of operating as one. There is less fear of being alienated or being deemed insane by the remainder of society. Therefore, the myriad of atrocities acting as a rubble of history have continued to expand. Modernity has also lessened the horror of said brainwashing. The textbooks have labeled times of slavery, genocide, war, a simulation, xenophobia, displacement, encampments, wrongful incarcerations, etc., as problems of the olden days. There is an assumption that the gruesome nature of said humanitarian crises has already peaked at its worst. Therefore, this concept addresses the universal. Anyone can fall victim to false comfort and security. While I am viewing this through a Western lens, I will not deny that it has occurred all over the globe. The first object I will analyze for this concept is the Curtis Hall exhibit. I apologize, I will say this name wrong. Binyavanga Wainaina discusses the irony of African-centered writing in his piece How to Write About Africa, with the Carver Hall exhibit following some of these tropes. He points out the need for Westerners to romanticize Africa and its perceived poverty and to insert our practices, such as agriculture, urbanization, and organized government, in place of existing structures. The Carver Hall exhibit leaned into this prehistoric fantasy and eroticization of African people due to the objects it displayed. A very dusky wicker beehive, rusty tools, and soiled boots sit behind the glass case. If the viewer reads closely, they will learn the tools and boots are from a river in Iowa, not Africa. The wording of the exhibit reeks of a colonial white savior complex. Progressive language such as fight, world hunger, globe, and difference is bolded. The African children crowd the white volunteers with great big smiles. The author of said exhibit has constructed and written under the influence of security blanket syndrome. If the people of Africa are portrayed as self-sustaining and innovative, North America's presence can be viewed as imperialistic rather than charitable. Imperialism cannot be a word uttered in modernity, as that is a method supposedly lost to kingdoms and dynasties. The second object I will analyze for this concept is Kendrick Lamar's Super Bowl halftime performance. In his performance, Kendrick Lamar offers several rhetorical strategies to break through the heavy fog of security blanket syndrome. The stage mimics the shape of a game board, the dancers stand divided in red, white, and blue, and Uncle Sam disrupts the flow from time to time. Lamar creates an anti-gaze to combat the gaze discussed in David Spur's Surveillance under Westernized segment. Spur notes all the factors that contribute to the Western gaze: privilege, hierarchical advantages, journalism, and how smoothly it pairs with distance. Lamar grabs hold of the lens, effectively swinging it into the faces of those in the stadium and those watching at home. Lamar rips off the blanket and reveals the carnage for what it is. The structure of Lamar's performance is not self-serving, as is the gaze Spur discusses. There is an intention behind Lamar putting himself and his fellow peers at a disadvantaged POV. They are utilizing arguably one of the world's biggest platforms, but still have to combat derogatory language, biased expectations, and prejudice. I did mention relating this back to the signifying monkey and the language surrounding African Americans and how Lamar specifically used the word ghetto in his performance. And I think that's a really good example of that connection in a modern day context. The third object I will analyze for this concept is the closure of the LGBTQ Success Center. The closure of the LGBTQ Success Center represents an ongoing danger. Many students migrated to this center for the safety it provided them. While Spur discusses a classification of nations, the idea still applies to what's happening on the ISU campus. The slashing of DEI infrastructures creates a jarring narrative. For example, the operation of the LGBTQ Success Center has been classified as unnecessary. Why is this? Other clubs revolving around agriculture, engineering, fraternities, and sororities have not been classified this way. While the topic of sexuality is much different than discussing crop rotation, there is still importance in the existence of both. They attend to other needs, but these needs are human. Moreover, the groups creating this classification may have no personal connection to the infrastructures. This begs the question of jurisdiction. Who has the proper jurisdiction for the affected population? Why is the unaffected population limiting their sympathy to passing comments and their action to purely theoretical? Are we secure in the notion that it's us against them? Alright, and then to sum it all up, the material significance of this concept is the risk of stagnation. This phenomenon is intensely present in the current world. People my age have not experienced an uptick in severity at this level and pace. And I feel like overall there's kind of a universal feeling of helplessness, especially with the idea that we are seeing kind of non-existent limits to authoritarian powers. And I think it's really important to be aware of even the unconscious desensitization that we're all putting ourselves through and that is being projected upon us. I think pointing that out and being aware is probably the first step in taking effective action versus, like I said, using a hashtag or changing a profile photo online. I think those are great steps, but I think it still plays into that whole idea of the security blanket syndrome that I've been talking about, basically. So yes, I think it's very important in modern day times because history is always writing itself, and we can't forget that we are part of the textbook and we have a page in it, and the outcomes are determined by us somewhat. So yeah, it really holds us accountable to that role, and I think that's important for us to think about. And yeah, that is my concept.